You're listening to The Deep End, a Penn Plastic Surgery podcast. Today, Dr. Azori is joined by Dr. Jens Berli, Chief of Plastic Surgery at OHSU, and our first guest from outside of Penn. Dr. Berli shares his fascinating journey from training in Switzerland and Johns Hopkins to becoming a pioneer in gender-affirming care. As the founder of one of the first formal training programs for gender surgery in the U.S., Dr. Berli discusses the evolution of his practice, the importance of multidisciplinary care, and his advice for trainees and programs aiming to advance this field. Let's dive in.
Welcome to another episode of the Deep End podcast. And actually, this is for you.
Thank you so much.
This is one of the gifts from today. You can open it later. But today we're with Dr. Jens Berli. He's visiting from Oregon, OHSU. It's funny to think, we were talking about it last night in the car, but it's funny to think that I think it was maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, however long it was, we were at Hopkins running around, and I knew him at the time because we overlapped in general surgery residency training. You haven't aged at all. Hopefully I haven't aged either.
Not much.
But he's now the chief at OHSU and founded their gender-affirming training program. So it's really fun to have you here. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit, and we're all excited to hear your talk. So.
Well, it's nice to be back out east.
Yeah. You can come out for good if you want. But I think, it's an interesting time in terms of gender-affirming care. I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted
to put it mildly. Yeah.
Talk to you today. But let's rewind a little bit to think back to your time in Zurich prior to coming to Hopkins, your early training at Hopkins with Andy Lee, Paul Manson, and then kind of your traveling fellowship. But even before all of that, what were the main things that drove you towards medicine and surgery?
Oh wow, we're going all the way back.
Oh yeah, we're going back.
Well, first I was like, it's such a pleasure to be here, and as you were just saying, it is almost like a decade ago that we were at Hopkins. I mean,
crazy.
Time passes so fast when you're in independent practice. I feel like it's it really accelerates. So with these coming out here, it's still sometimes have imposter, like you're like, well, what have I got to contribute here? And it's like you look back like, well, it's been 10 years, so that starts to count for something. But what got me into medicine, I guess, like the honest answer's got to be the TV show Emergency Room, which probably not everyone still knows, is kind of the pre-Grey's Anatomy, and emergency care was not something that had its own specialty in Switzerland. Switzerland emergency care is really managed by general surgery. They manage anything surgical, including orthotrauma, and then you have medicine, and they manage the ER, so to speak. And so for me, it was clear that it's going to be a surgical specialty. And then I had the fortune to be able to spend almost a year abroad as a medical student. So I went to South Africa, Australia, and Canada, and really fell in love with the kind of the Anglo-Saxon education system. It was much more of an immersive experience, also a bit more in line with kind of the TV reality that was portrayed to me on the screen as a child. Than it was in Europe, or is in Europe, which is you have work hour restrictions. Yes, you have them in the U.S. too, but in Europe they can be between, in the Nordic countries, 35 to 40 hours. In the Germanic countries, between 45 to 55 hours a week, and so it does become a bit more of a, I wouldn't say shift work, but it does become, you go to work, you leave work, and then you have your life outside of work, which I guess in some ways is very healthy, but in other ways, again, I was missing kind of that immersive type experience. And so after medical school, I did 2 years as a general surgery resident in Switzerland. At that time, I thought, kind of life progressed. I thought maybe I was going to do cardiac surgery, so I had an integrated cardiac surgery spot in Switzerland kind of lined up, and
That's right. I remember your
Yeah,
adventures in
and
cardio.
so in Switzerland, you don't have like residency programs like in the U.S. where you start with your cohort and you graduate. It's kind of a bit more do it your own residency where you work 2 years in this hospital, 3 years in that hospital. You collect your cases. You start anytime during the year. So you don't have that class feeling. And so because I thought maybe I'll do a fellowship in the U.S. I did the USMLEs and had a good score, and so I was like, well, maybe I could apply for an actual residency in the U.S.
What was your score? I'm just kidding.
243.
No,
243. That's not a secret. Back then, that was a big deal. But yeah, no, so like...
Back then it was a big deal. Yeah.
So, but naively, I applied. I was like in my, early to mid 20s. I was like applied to New York, Chicago. I did not know much about the competitiveness of categorical general surgery positions. And then as a joke, I applied to Hopkins because you had like a certain number of applications with your ERAS, and I didn't even know where Hopkins was. I thought it was in Alabama or something.
Don't admit that. Don't ever tell anybody.
Well, we
that.
just did. And but I mean, my U.S.
Hopefully,
geography.
John Cameron doesn't listen to this
I
podcast.
know. Well, I knew the name, right? And so the only two places that wrote back were a categorical position in Harlem City Hospital in New York, and then Hopkins with a prelim. And so I called Hopkins and talked to the program coordinator, and I was like, hey, is this a pay position? She's like, hey, you can, probably only gonna buy IKEA furniture, but it's a pay position. And so I asked the Swiss boards if I could credit those years if I came back, and they're like, yeah, you can credit those years in the cases you do there. So I was like, what an adventure. So I'll go for 2 years to really get that immersive experience of really, working the 80, 90 hours, whatever it is. And so I came to the U.S., but I had a half a year overlap time between these two jobs. So I spent time in Greenland as a primary care physician, which was really formative for me in many ways. So spent 6 months there, and then came to the United States, and started at Hopkins where we met, and kind of started in general surgery, and so I did that for 2 years, and by the second, it's a prelim position. It was almost like the old pyramid system where a program director there was pretty rough. So you would get set down every 3 months and be like, all right, you're ranking number 2, number 3. You went up or down, So, and depending on your ranking, you would be prioritized for categorical general surgery positions in the U.S., which I wasn't 100% sure I was gonna do. But by the second year, I kind of, I was like, I want to finish it. I want to stay in the U.S. At least for my training, and so it was like April of my second year where I suddenly got a page, and it was like, hey, do you want to do plastic surgery? And I was like, no, I don't want to do plastic surgery. That didn't never cross me as a specialty I wanted to be in. But then again, I also didn't want to be arrogant, right? And be like, well, I'm at, at such a great institution, and here's a unique opportunity. And so I was like, it would be a little bit foolish of me to just kind of say no without looking a little bit into it. So I had a week to look into it, and then lo and behold, I got the spot, and joined the plastic surgery program, which was a culture,
That was the biggest news in Baltimore when you got the spot. Everyone was talking about it.
But I'm interested to kind of hear from you as well, like as you switch from general, like, granted, I did 4 years of general surgery, and it was more of the junior years. But when you switch after, still many years in another specialty, and you switch over to plastic surgery, to me at least, it was quite the culture shock, right?
Oh my gosh,
going
yeah.
from kind of people are always about to die. There's always like high acuity to like no, you got to put the steri strip. No, don't. I wouldn't put the suture. Take that one out again. Like it can feel a little rough. I don't know how you experienced that.
Very much, especially when you go from a general surgery program like Hopkins, where it's very old school and high intensity, to plastic surgery. But thinking back to your class, you had such a great class of prelim international people: Tony, Tanus, Peter. Just such a great class. What do you miss most about your time in Baltimore?
It's definitely that camaraderie.
Was it the Inner Harbor water, jumping into the Inner Harbor?
No, I got so sick from that. I lost a bet and jumped into the Inner Harbor. Yeah, no, that one of the memories I love.
The camaraderie.
Yeah, the camaraderie.
Such a great class.
Yeah, but I think a lot of a lot of residencies experience that, right? Like that, as they say, kind of in the trenches together. And that was really what I was missing in Switzerland, and I didn't quite have that same feeling again, because people come in, go home, you work your shift work, so to speak, and kind of being together. That's also what gets you through residency. Really, is your peers.
That's
I'm
so
still.
true.
I'm just after this, I'm going to go and see one of my, really good friends who's been practicing in New Jersey, Eric Wimmers, and, we've been friends since residency. And so, those kind of relationships you forge it usually kind of last, which is, kind of privileged, get real friendships as an adult. It's not always easy to make.
And it's funny how you kind of you circle back around, like you and I last night driving together. So thinking back to general surgery, then plastic surgery, and then when you kind of traveled the world for your, when you're kind of training yourself to do gender affirming care prior to there being fellowships, who would you say were your most influential mentors at the time?
Yeah, so I mean so maybe just for context, and I want to expand a little bit here on the importance or the value of electives, if I may, if that's okay, because honestly, like my career, I didn't plan to end up being a gender surgeon. That kind of came about through a grand rounds presentation I gave as a third year, and then got tapped by Rick Redette, who was at Hopkins doing a lot of phalloplasty for patients with congenital bladder exstrophy. And due to this presentation, he tapped me to help with a book chapter, and started mentoring me, and then had other mentors that became instrumental. Rachel Bluband Langner.
The presentation that changed your life.
That was really the presentation that changed my life.
Was it a good presentation? It must have been good.
Yeah, no, I think I put in a lot of effort, because I did have imposture, kind of matching into plastic surgery. I had like 2 second author papers. Like people had companies, they had like PhDs, this, that, and the other, pocket squares. I had none of these things, and so
you just looked in my pocket to make sure.
So for me it was I felt like this is where at least I get the stage and can kind of show that I'm not like that I can hold my own. And so I put a lot of effort into that presentation. So it really did kind of change my career path. And coming across the gender literature, writing that book chapter, and so I was able to do a visiting elective in Belgium, where Stan Monstre was practicing gender medicine, surgery, and phalloplasty, really pioneer in that. And so he certainly became an international mentor, so to speak. And then again, Rachel Bluband Langner at University of Maryland was just starting a program, so kind of working very closely with her. Beth Fisher was a surgeon in private practice. So just finding mentors, but then also having the ability to spend 2 months with urology during residency, and going to Thailand to spend some time. And those are really kind of unique opportunities of having that ability and that time that a program can give residents, be that a month or 2 months of electives. So when I came to OHSU as the associate program director, that was one of the focuses, like let's get an elective where people can really go where they want to go. But be that international rotation sites, but there's a lot of rules around what constitutes a rotation. And then local GMEs will also like put up quite a few barriers, because at the end of the day they pay for residents, right? It's like a resident that's gone for a month, that is technically salary gone for a month, right?
Yeah.
And at least on the Excel spreadsheets. And so when I came to OHSU, we sent residents, to rotations, and then we got a, kind of a bit of pushback from the institution. That has since changed, since our residents been unionized, and that was one of the union kind of negotiations, is to have more leniency with electives.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just so important that we, have some consistency across programs. Otherwise, our specialty in particular, where training is so heterogeneous between divisions, departments, how many months of general surgery people do, if they have access to electives or not, and so disadvantage certain programs over others. And I think electives are crucial for people to be able to venture out, see different things and bring different things back. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the career I have today. Didn't have that opportunity.
Yep. No, and same with me. I mean, I did an elective. I thought I wanted to do surgical oncology. I did an elective in plastic surgery. It's life changing for sure. So it sounds like Rick Redette had a major influence on you. And then all of your traveling. So, and then after that, you established a training program at OHSU in gender affirming care, which is the first year, if I understand, that gender affirming care became a formalized training in the U.S. Is that right?
Yeah, we're like at the time when I got into it, there were mostly private practitioners doing gender affirming surgery in the United States. There were programs such as Michigan with Bill Kuzan, who certainly pioneered academic gender affirming surgery as part of his practice, and the residents got training, but those were very far and few in between. And so when we at OHSU, when we really started kind of bringing the full comprehensive aspect of gender affirming surgery, so that including, and the multidisciplinary nature, really, that's important, right? Having urology, reconstructive urologists, GYN, plastic surgery, and then, behavioral health and all that comes with it, kind of as a comprehensive program, and then being able to kind of train people within that comprehensive multidisciplinary structure, and that's really where that kind of a fellowship then makes a lot of sense, right? And so our fellows, they spend time with urology and plastic surgery. And so there's two fellows, a urology fellow and a plastic surgery fellow.
Oh.
They also spend time, again, with our behavioral health specialists, other specialists as well, ENT. And so really getting this kind of comprehensive, training. So
is a urology fellow a specialized gender affirming fellow as well?
Yeah, well, they have a focus on reconstructive urology, but with a gender affirming surgery. So they're part of the GURS fellowships.
Okay, so you have two fellows a year.
Two fellows a year.
Wow.
And of course, the urology fellow, maybe they come and spend, see one facial fem or two, right? They're not going to spend a month doing facial feminization, right? But just to, they come to clinic to really see how patients transition, not just from their kind of tunnel vision focus, but more comprehensively.
And your past graduates, would you say, where have they been ending up?
They were
private practice?
We kept them all.
Oh, you kept them all, yeah.
Not all, but we've been very fortunate.
We've kept them all.
No,
You're being very greedy.
Yeah. We've been very fortunate to have Blair Peters. For anyone in the kind of social media sphere, probably familiar with Dr. Peters' work on Instagram, queer surgeon, really kind of an advocate for gender affirming surgery, a very thoughtful person, and great surgeon, also did a peripheral nerve fellowship, so really fortunate to have him on the team, and also taken on the gender surgery fellowship now, since I have different roles now, which is exciting. And then we hired person well, that you actually, I would say it's a little bit your making as well. You reached out, said, I have this phenomenal friend of mine who is really interested in your fellowship, Dr. Monica Yayata Farula, who's joined our faculty as well. And so it's the three of us, and then also my really the person who's kind of been behind it all, Dr. Julie Hansen, the previous division head, who was doing mostly top surgery, but really recognized that there was a potential in Portland, Oregon for a comprehensive center. So
that's great.
So
what's been kind of the most exciting thing since you've established that fellowship and the training in general, and the landscape in Oregon?
I mean, not being alone.
Yeah.
So the first year starting phalloplasty, at a university hospital where you don't know anyone, right? You just come in as a new faculty. You're starting. After all the years of training, you're in your independent practice doing phalloplasty, and the next surgeon who's also doing the same surgery as you're doing is in San Francisco. The residents obviously have no experience in it either. At the time, I didn't have a mid-level practitioner, right? And so it is a 24/7 availability. Fortunately, my wife and I had long distance. She was in Baltimore still, so it allowed me to be always there and kind of monitor every little thing. But that's obviously not sustainable. So having a real team, right? So patients know when they come for phalloplasty at OHSU, they're not coming for an individual surgeon. They're really coming for the team, and so that we really we take care of all patients together for phalloplasty, right? and makes it a lot more sustainable, safe, and kind of and having that kind of setup is really helpful for patient and provider.
Between you and your partners, do you each offer kind of the full spectrum, or are certain people more specialized, like you for bottom surgery, someone else for facial fem?
No, you could say there's the kind of the big three, right? There's facial, and then there's feminizing and masculinizing genital surgery, and so I personally do phalloplasty and facial surgery, and then obviously do some top surgery as well, but I don't do any vaginoplasty, vulvoplasty. Blair Peters, he's doing, working closely with urology, so kind of joining forces with the robotic vaginoplasty with our urology colleagues, and then doing phalloplasty, but does not do much face at all. And so everyone kind of overlaps a little bit, which is good. At the end of the day, really being able to go deep into one procedure that's complex takes a lot of energy, and I think you can do that well in two. But then helping other people out, right? So being part of a team without leading the team, you see that also in, for example, breast reconstruction, right? You might be someone that kind of helps out in a bilateral deep, but you're not the primary deep surgeon that goes into all the intricacies, and then research comes into that as well.
Yeah. So I don't know if I know this, but what took you to Oregon, and how do you think Oregon allowed you and OHSU allowed you to do what you do and establish this gender affirming care?
Was it one of these things you can't plan, right place, right time? It was actually, and I it was 2014 when I decided on the subspecialty as something that interests me, something I feel like, here I can find a passion for, complex surgery. And it was in particular the phalloplasty surgery that really drew me to it, the patient population. But I thought that's going to be, maybe part of my practice. I had no idea that, I didn't know that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, that changes in that law. I didn't know, that there were that many patients that had not received care for a very long time. The volume of patients, I think, surprised all of us. And so I thought this is going to be something that's part of my practice. So I was going to do hand fellowship because that was functional surgery, a lot of nerve, and obviously the donor side. And then I liked hand surgery, and so I thought I'll do hand surgery fellowship, and then over the course of my career I'll do a gender on the side. Although that was my main passion. And then in the middle of a hand fellowship application, there was an ACAPS posting for a gender surgeon in an academic setting in Oregon, right?
Oh,
and
wow.
that really was the first kind of, we're looking for someone to do gender in academia. For people like Bill Kuzan, that just kind of naturally happened. Also, again, on the side, became a big part of his practice and passion, but not like something that he got hired for. But here was a job that was specifically exactly for what I wanted to do in a city that I had never visited. But Oregon, at least from what I could tell from photographs, looked a little similar to Switzerland and had the kind of that kind of bit of topography. And so I was like, and multiple people reached out. I was like, "Did you see that job? That might be, might be something for you." So I emailed, and then I was like, "Listen, this is a long shot. I got to know within the next 6 weeks, because otherwise, I'm doing the hand match and I have to pull out before I'm actually gonna submit the rank list." And so within 6-7 weeks, I got a signed offer letter, which is great. And that also gave me, that was as a PGY5, so it gave me a bit of time to prepare.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And Oregon seems like the right culture for something like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Portland as a city, obviously is a progressive city, but then also the way that the healthcare laws, the state laws are set up, conducive to that. There's been a lot of advocacy work within Oregon to kind of have gender affirming surgery be part of the covered benefits in the Oregon Health Plan. And that certainly helped, and that's only grown. I mean, our biggest problem that we have is our wait list, right? And it's as
Yeah, what is your wait list?
Well, depending on types of surgeries, can be just to be seen in consultation between 6 months to 2 to 3 years, depending on the surgery, and it's
This is Philadelphia, by the way.
Oh, look at that. That's
it looks
nice.
a little bit like Oregon.
That's really nice. The sun.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't have a camera, there's the sun coming up behind us.
Yeah, but that's a long wait list.
It's a long wait list, and it's only gotten worse, right? And it's not because of local patients only, but it's if you're living in a state that right now is being some of these rights are being taken away, then people obviously are going to try to move somewhere where they feel more welcome, and so with that comes just a migration, and I think we'll see that within the United States, right? There's going to be
You guys are probably going to be hit by that for sure.
Yeah, we have been, and it doesn't take much, right? Like a facial fem surgery is I think it's an all-day surgery, and you as with all the other things you do in practice, right? You can maybe do 30 to 50 patients a year, and so it only takes 50 patients moving, and one surgeon's already having another year wait list, right? And so
that's true.
So
Dr. Cerletti, Dr. Fosno, they do a lot of top surgery here. Dr. Swanson, Perchek do some facial femme and other aspects of gender affirming care. In establishing a program, there's a lot of things that we have found to be obstacles in a way. For instance, collaboration and having a good urologist who's also invested. But in establishing a gender-affirming training program or multidisciplinary center, what do you think are the important aspects that a program should have?
I mean, the important aspects, maybe the most important, is having institutional buy-in, right? Because otherwise you will run up against, some limitations. And in particular, right, surgeries will always be something that the hospital is interested in, obviously. But to do these surgeries safely, you really want to, as you said, work in a multidisciplinary team, which does not only include other surgeons, but really includes behavioral health specialists, right? Like licensed clinical social workers, psychologists, people that are here to kind of support you, support the patients, and those someone needs to, also hire those and support those salaries, have the HR home for those teams, and so housing all of that within one clinical department can become difficult, right? And so the best avenue, and that's I think has been one of the success models at our program, is really that the hospital supports by having the infrastructure of the transgender whole health program with all that comes with that website, again, all the things I just mentioned earlier, and a phone line where patients can call in and feel, community advisory board that's supported. I mean, all these things kind of have that in place, because that's not something that you as a surgeon want to necessarily, day in and day out manage, right? Having the support also from the hospital by creating the positions of a medical director, surgical director, just so that there is a cohesive structure that spans the whole healthcare system and not just any clinical specialty. And then, having two of each, right? You don't want to have a program that if the surgeon leaves, the whole thing falls apart, especially if you have a fellowship. Even if I would, leave Oregon tomorrow, this would sustain, like nothing hinges upon one single individual, which I think is really important. Takes a bit of time to build.
Did you just announce that you're leaving Oregon
Yeah,
tomorrow?
definitely not.
This is not the right place to tell people you're leaving.
Definitely not. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. So do you meet like with the CEO, the chair of surgery? Like, who are the people that you kind of meet with to talk about this when you're establishing a program?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously in the plastic surgery side, it's fairly straightforward. You want to do a fellowship, you make sure you show that it's financially viable, that you can, have the cases, doesn't affect the residency and so on. So that's like any other fellowship. But as it relates to kind of building the program and the support, we have a multidisciplinary advisory board, kind of a leadership group, and then we set up meeting. We have an executive lead in the C-suite, and that we kind of report to. We were fortunate to be also able to hire a manager for the whole program. So again, direct lines of communication with the executive leadership team is important, especially in the times that we're in right now, right, where there's a lot of pressure also from the public that kind of comes in, And so that's not something that you as a surgeon in your practice that want to focus on actual patient care, education, research, you cannot be distracted that much, right? So you do need to have a team in place if you want to do this in an academic medical center.
Yeah. No, those are all really good points. And I think back to any specialty, like multidisciplinary care, buy-in from the institution, establishing a fellowship, all of those things, obviously you need support. You've had many different roles since being at OHSU, from program director, associate program director, fellowship, and now the chief. As the program director, did you notice that with the kind of the all the emphasis and the gender affirming care happening there, that the residents were starting to have an interest in it, or not necessarily, just because they were doing so much of it?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is that we have a great setup in Oregon, in that, we, different than the East Coast, right? It's, we're one tertiary care, bigger academic hospital that really serves a large catchment area from southern Washington, Idaho down to Northern California, and so we're all on one site. So we have 18 residents. We have faculty that really also overlap in their specialties a lot, and really as a program director, I put on a very different hat, and also as the division head, right? It's very important that we have a really well-rounded program. The gender surgery has a lot of spotlight in the past few years, and it's certainly something that we've have a high volume of. But the residents, we want to make sure that, like, most of our residents are end up going into hand surgery at the moment, craniofacial surgery, and then we certainly had a few of our residents that went into gender surgery. We had one of my very early residents when I first started there, Dr. Nick Esmond, who ended up doing a fellowship with a private practitioner who was back in town. So, and then we have a lot of our residents who ended up in private practice in the region who might be doing some top surgery. There's one resident doing some facial femme, and so they make it part of their practice, right? And so that's always the question, right? What is a gender surgeon, right? Is it, and it's like any other thing in plastic surgery, there are people that do it, the kind of the more advanced stuff that probably you want to have be done at an academic center or a larger hospital, and then there's people that can in the community do all the care that patients need, like top surgery and so on. And so it's a mixed bag. I would say a lot of residents get a lot of exposure and take it out into their practice, however that comes.
And then again, thinking back a little bit, so you were at a different time when you did your training. You went to London, Thailand, Serbia, Belgium, Denmark. Out of all of those experiences, if you had to advise somebody now, like, is there anything that stands out as, like, if you're interested in doing what I do, you should go and spend some time with this person, like Monstray or something like that?
I mean, it oscillates. I think
and what's great is you took all of that and brought it to Oregon. You took all of those experiences and brought a little piece of all of it to Oregon. So that's really neat.
I mean, I think our specialty, right? We hear it time and time again, but it is so true, right? We are a principle-based specialty, right? So once, and that's maybe more for the resident listener or medical student listener, but like once you have your basic and advanced skill set in terms of like your surgical moves down, and you understand the principles in plastic surgery, it does become, to a degree, fairly simple, right? Because you can apply it in all kinds of different situations. And so my biggest recommendation is the earlier you can in your training, start doing drawings, like hand drawings. I'm a terrible at it. I'm not good at it at all, but and that prevented me from doing it early in residency because I don't know, I'm not good at drawing, but just observe and draw. And then because then you can go and travel, go and spend a day somewhere with someone, and if you already have your other techniques, everything down, then you really absorb all the smaller details, and then talk to people and be like, hey, what's the underlying principle of why you're doing it the way you're doing it? And so what I noticed in my travels with phalloplasty which was fortunate, I went, because it's not like people do 10 phalloplasties in 10 days, right? They're like, there was one in Belgium, then I had to fly down to Serbia to see one, then to London to see one, back to Belgium because they had another one. So I kind of was hopping, following.
Did you have a private jet?
Yeah, not. And what I realized is like a lot of people didn't quite know what the other center was doing, and some were better than others in explaining why they're doing what they're doing. Sometimes it just was the technique kind of as it evolved intuitively, and so by seeing the different centers, I was able to kind of combine, like get a better understanding of the underlying principles, and kind of bring that back, to OHSU and be like, all right, the way they did it in London made absolute most sense to me from a plastic surgery principle standpoint. And then added on some other things I learned. And so to your question, kind of what my recommendation, I mean, if someone wants to really do offer genital surgery or facial surgery, I do think doing it, unless you had a training program, like residents that pay attention and are spend a lot of time with us, they don't have to do a fellowship, I don't think. But people that don't have that as part of the training, they should do a fellowship at this point. When I was getting into it, there was none, so I think it's okay that it's either that or no care, right?
Yeah.
But nowadays, I do think doing a fellowship, if you want to offer these surgeries, is
How many fellowships are there in the U.S.?
I believe right now we're around about 6 or 7
wow.
fellowships.
And is it pretty competitive, or
right now we
like more applicants than spots? Or?
No, not like right now. It's usually programs going unmatched, so
gotcha.
it's definitely more in the favor of the applicants. We've
So
seen
you
a
guys
lot.
haven't had trouble with 2 fellows matching those fellows?
No, we haven't had issues, but there's a lot of interest when we see applications coming through from medical students, and it has not yet translated into fellowship applicants.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I anticipate that changing in the next couple of years.
In what way?
In that we'll see more applicants probably.
Yeah. Cool. There's a few questions that we ask all the people that we talk to, so we have to keep the script, but what's your favorite surgical instrument? Like an instrument where you say, like, if I didn't have this, I could not survive.
The Joseph scissor.
Why?
It's always sharp. It's super precise.
What do you use it for?
I use it for any form of kind of tissue shape, like skin shaping, de-epping, cutting fine edges. So that would have to be the Joseph scissors.
Yeah.
I have a lot to say about instruments. Like residents, they're not allowed to use debakis in my OR, they're not allowed to use tenotomies in my OR, and they're not allowed to use loops, ideally, in any kind of cases.
Yeah.
So I got a couple of...
It sounds like you took that Hopkins intensity with you to the OR. Did you smack their hand? I'm just kidding.
No.
And then, what's your favorite thing about Oregon outside of work?
Outside of work, I mean, it's just the quick access to just the splendor of nature. Kind of being in awe is...
Yeah, what's kind of like your week and weekend look like?
So me and my wife, we have a really nice set of friends that have property and ranches out in Central Oregon, so we spend quite a bit of time out there, just taking advantage of being able to leave town within 10 minutes and being in an environment that is awe-inspiring. Because in adult life, I think, finding those moments of awe is, that's what it's all about still, to kind of keep that wonder, curiosity going, to not get dragged in too much into the daily intricacies of politics and this and that, and, whatever happened. And so having that kind of right there and accessible has got to be my favorite part about Oregon.
Yeah. Well, it's been so awesome having you today. You're officially our first guest on this podcast ever.
Okay.
not our first person ever, but our first out of Penn guest. So, which is great. It's so great to see you and to have you, and we're all looking forward to your talk today. And this is a mug, so put it safely in your bag so that it doesn't crush on the airplane.